After being abandoned by her husband, she meets someone who helps her start over, but she can't believe who he really was. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Rachel stood at the edge of her kitchen counter, the only place she still felt a semblance of control. The air smelled of ground coffee beans and freshly baked croissants, her new normal after months of heartbreak and uncertainty. Her husband Mark had walked out on her and their 5-year-old daughter, Lily, with barely an explanation, a hollow apology and a suitcase in hand. Rachel had never seen it coming, or maybe she had ignored the signs. Either way, she had been left to pick up the pieces, and that's when the idea for the cafe came to her. It wasn't much at first. The cafe was a small, cozy space tucked into the corner of a quiet street in their town, but it was hers. The name Second Chances was more than just a catchy title. It was a mantra she repeated to herself daily. With Lily by her side, Rachel pushed through the long hours, her mind busy with keeping the place running. Anything to distract herself from the pain. But business was slow. The town was small, and the locals were loyal to the already established places around. Rachel tried everything. New menu items, promotions, even decorating the cafe to make it warmer and more welcoming. But nothing seemed to draw in the steady flow of customers she desperately needed. Every night, she would collapse in a bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake in starting over like this. Yet every morning, Lily's smile and the smell of coffee brewing gave her a reason to keep going. Rachel was wiping down the tables one slow afternoon when a man walked in, his entrance marked by the soft jingle of the bell hanging above the door. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and a sharp, attentive look in his eyes. His suit was pressed but casual, and he carried an air of quiet confidence. Rachel noticed him immediately, though she tried not to stare. He didn't seem like the type who frequented small, quiet cafes like hers. "Good afternoon," she greeted, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear as he approached the counter. He smiled, and there was something warm about it. "Good afternoon. I've heard good things about your place." Rachel blinked, surprised. "You have? Word travels fast in small towns," he said with a soft chuckle. "I'm Jonathan, by the way." "Rachel," she replied, offering her hand. Jonathan took it, his grip firm but gentle. "Nice to meet you, Rachel. I'm actually in town looking for potential business investments, and I've been visiting different establishments to get a feel for things." Rachel's heart skipped. Business investments? It seemed too good to be true. Still, she kept her tone even. "Well, I'd be happy to show you around and tell you more about what we do here." Jonathan spent the afternoon in the cafe, asking questions about her menu, her business model, and her goals. He seemed genuinely interested, and Rachel found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't expected. She told him about the challenges of running a small business, how hard it was to get things off the ground, and how she had invested everything she had left into making the cafe a success. He listened attentively, nodding and understanding. "I think you've got something special here, Rachel. With the right backing, this place could really thrive." Her heart fluttered. Could this be the break she needed? Over the next few weeks, Jonathan became a regular at Second Chances. He would drop by for coffee, sometimes with a newspaper in hand, other times with his laptop as he worked quietly from a corner table. His presence became a comfort to Rachel, and soon, they started discussing more than just business. Jonathan was thoughtful, kind, and most importantly, he seemed to believe in her cafe, in her vision. For the first time since Mark had left, Rachel felt like someone saw her, not just as a struggling business owner, but as a person with dreams and ambitions. One rainy afternoon, after the cafe had closed, Jonathan stayed behind to help Rachel lock up. They stood together in the dimly lit cafe, the rain tapping softly against the windows. Rachel was exhausted but happy. Jonathan had just mentioned a potential investor he wanted to introduce her to, someone who could help her take the cafe to the next level. As she turned to thank him, she noticed the way he was looking at her, like she was more than just a business opportunity. The air between them felt charged, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel felt a spark of something more than just friendship. "Jonathan, she began, but he cut her off gently. "Rachel," he said, stepping closer. "I know we've been working together for a while now, but I need to be honest with you. This isn't just about business anymore. I care about you, and I care about this cafe. I want to see it succeed because I believe in you." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't been prepared for this, hadn't expected to feel anything like this so soon after her world had fallen apart. But Jonathan was different. He was steady, reliable, and he had been there for her when no one else had. Before she could respond, the bell over the door jingled, and Rachel's heart sank as she turned to see Mark standing in the doorway, drenched from the rain. "Rachel, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. The room seemed to freeze. Rachel's pulse raced as she took in the sight of her estranged husband, the man who had shattered her life, standing in her cafe. What could he possibly want now? "Mark, what are you doing here?" Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake," Mark said, stepping forward. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life, and I want to make things right." Rachel's mind reeled. After all the months of silence, after the pain and the loneliness, he had the audacity to walk back into her life and ask for forgiveness? But as she glanced at Jonathan, who stood silently by her side, Rachel knew the choice she had to make. This was her second chance, not just for the cafe, but for herself. She wouldn't let Mark take that from her. "Mark," she said, her voice steady and resolute, "I've moved on. You need to do the same." Mark looked stunned, his gaze flickering to Jonathan, then back to Rachel. He opened his mouth to speak, but seemed to think better of it. With one last, lingering look, he turned and walked out into the rain, leaving Rachel standing there, heart pounding, but feeling stronger than ever. Jonathan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Rachel nodded, her eyes still on the door. "I think I finally am." Rachel's decision to send Mark away gave her an unexpected sense of freedom, as if a weight she hadn't fully realized was suffocating her had been lifted. For months, she had carried the burden of his abandonment, his betrayal, and the hollow sense of failure it had left behind. But now, standing there in her cafe with Jonathan by her side, Rachel felt like she had finally taken control of her life. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Rachel sat at her kitchen table with a glass of wine, reflecting on everything that had happened. Jonathan had stayed for a while after Mark left, offering his quiet support as she closed the cafe and walked back to her apartment. He hadn't pressed her to talk about what had just transpired, instead letting her process it in her own time. But as he left, he had given her a look that said more than words ever could, a look that told her he wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, Rachel walked into her cafe with renewed determination. She and Jonathan had agreed to meet later that day to discuss the investor he had in mind. And though part of her felt nervous about the future, another part of her felt a growing excitement. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to take second chances to the next level. She wouldn't let fear hold her back anymore. As Rachel prepared for the day, she couldn't help but notice the small, subtle changes that had begun to take place in the cafe. More customers were coming in, some of them new faces, others familiar regulars who had become part of the cafe's charm. The word was spreading. People were talking about second chances, and Rachel's hard work was starting to pay off. Every latte she poured, every pastry she baked, felt like a step forward. When Jonathan arrived later that afternoon, his expression was warm and encouraging. He had a few papers in his hand, which he placed on the table as they sat down to talk. The cafe was quieter now, the last of the lunch crowd having drifted out, leaving Rachel and Jonathan alone in the cozy atmosphere she had worked so hard to create. "So, I've been thinking about how to approach this next phase," Jonathan began, glancing at the papers before turning his attention fully to Rachel. "There's an investor I know. He's been looking to get involved in small businesses that have potential, and I think this cafe could be a perfect fit for him." Rachel felt a flutter of excitement, but tried to stay grounded. What exactly would this investment mean? What would he be looking for? "Well," Jonathan said, leaning back in his chair, "he'd be interested in helping you expand, maybe opening a second location or adding new features to the cafe, like a bakery or catering service. He's willing to put up a substantial amount of capital to get things rolling." Rachel nodded, her mind spinning with possibilities. She had dreamed of expanding, of turning second chances into something bigger, but the reality of actually making it happen had always seemed out of reach. Now, with Jonathan's help, that dream was starting to feel tangible. "There's just one thing," Jonathan added, his tone softening slightly. "He'd want a share of ownership. It wouldn't be controlling interest, but he'd be a partner. I think it's a fair deal, but I want you to know exactly what it entails." Rachel paused, considering. The idea of sharing ownership made her uneasy, but the cafe was struggling. And without an investment, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep it afloat. Plus, Jonathan had been nothing but honest and supportive throughout the process. She trusted him. "I think it's worth exploring," Rachel said finally, a smile spreading across her face. "I mean, this is the kind of opportunity I've been hoping for." Jonathan smiled back, relief and admiration in his eyes. "I'm glad you feel that way. I'll set up a meeting with him, and we can take it from there." As the days passed, Rachel found herself growing more excited about the future of second chances. She spent hours brainstorming new ideas for the cafe, envisioning what an expanded menu or a second location might look like. She felt invigorated by the possibilities, and Jonathan's constant encouragement only fueled her ambition. But as the meeting with the investor approached, Rachel began to feel a nagging sense of doubt. It wasn't about the business itself. She believed in her cafe and in her ability to make it thrive. But there was something about Jonathan that didn't quite sit right. He had always been upfront with her, but there were moments when she caught him deep in thought, as if he was wrestling with something he hadn't yet shared. The night before the investor meeting, Rachel found herself unable to sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with questions she couldn't quite answer. Finally, she got out of bed and padded into the living room, where she sat on the couch, staring out the window at the quiet street below. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and Rachel glanced at the screen. It was a text from Jonathan. "I know you're probably nervous about tomorrow, but I believe in you. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. You're stronger than you know." Rachel smiled at the message, but the unease in her chest remained. She wanted to trust Jonathan fully, but something in the back of her mind kept telling her there was more to the story. The next day, Rachel dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a simple yet professional outfit that made her feel confident. As she arrived at the cafe, she found Jonathan already waiting for her, a calm and reassuring presence. "You ready for this?" he asked with a smile. Rachel nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." The investor, a man named Philip, arrived shortly after. He was older, with graying hair and a sharp, businesslike demeanor, but he greeted Rachel warmly, and they quickly fell into a discussion about the cafe's future. Philip asked thoughtful questions, and Rachel found herself relaxing into the conversation, feeling more and more optimistic about what could come next. But as the meeting wore on, Rachel noticed something strange. Every time Philip mentioned the financial details of the partnership, specifically the percentage of ownership, Jonathan seemed to shift uncomfortably in his seat. It was subtle, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Jonathan wasn't telling her. When the meeting finally wrapped up and Philip left, Rachel turned to Jonathan, her brow furrowed with concern. "Jonathan, is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You seem distracted." Jonathan hesitated for a moment, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Rachel, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Jonathan looked away, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I didn't want to tell you this before the meeting because I didn't want to complicate things. But Philip isn't just any investor. He's actually someone who worked with your ex-husband." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "I found out a few weeks ago, but I didn't know how to tell you. Mark, your ex, he's involved in some serious financial issues. Philip was one of his business partners, and when Mark disappeared, Philip lost a lot of money. He's been trying to recoup some of it ever since." Rachel's mind spun as she tried to process the information. "So, you're saying you brought him here to invest in my cafe, knowing that he's connected to Mark?" Jonathan's expression was filled with regret. "I thought it was a good opportunity for you. I didn't think it would matter where the money came from, as long as it helped you succeed." Rachel stood there, speechless. The cafe, Jonathan, everything she had been working for. It all suddenly felt tangled in a web of deception she hadn't seen coming. "I trusted you, Jonathan," Rachel whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought you were helping me because you believed in me, not because of some connection to my past." Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "I do believe in you, Rachel. I swear, I had no intention of hurting you. I just didn't want you to lose this chance." Rachel's chest tightened as she realized the gravity of the situation. She had built her second chance on the foundation of this cafe. But now, everything seemed to be crumbling beneath her feet. Rachel stood motionless, the weight of Jonathan's revelation sinking deep into her bones. The man she had trusted, the one who had promised to help her rebuild her life, had kept a secret that was directly tied to the man who had torn her life apart. She felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted, leaving her disoriented, uncertain of what was real. "I need some time to think," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan reached for her, his expression full of regret and worry, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "Please, Jonathan, I need space." He hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but in the end he respected her request. "I understand," he said softly. "I'll give you the time you need, Rachel. Just know that I never wanted to hurt you." With that, he turned and left the cafe, the door closing with a soft jingle behind him. Rachel stood there for what felt like an eternity, her mind racing. She felt betrayed, not just by Jonathan's omission, but by the fact that she had allowed herself to trust again, only to be reminded of how fragile that trust could be. Later that night, after closing the cafe, Rachel sat on her couch, staring blankly at the wall. Lily was asleep in her room, blissfully unaware of the turmoil her mother was going through. Rachel wished she could protect her daughter from the complexities of adult life, from the heartbreak and deception that seemed to surround them. As the hours ticked by, Rachel couldn't shake the thought of Philip, of the fact that he had been Mark's business partner. Why would someone connected to her ex-husband be interested in investing in her cafe? What was his true motive? Unable to ignore the nagging questions any longer, Rachel pulled out her laptop and began to search for information about Philip. It didn't take long for her to uncover a series of articles about Mark's failed business ventures. Philip had indeed been one of Mark's major investors, and when Mark's company went under, Philip had lost a significant amount of money. It seemed that Philip had been trying to recover from that financial loss ever since. But there was something else, a detail buried in one of the articles that caught Rachel's attention. Philip wasn't just looking to recoup his losses. He had been quietly buying up properties connected to Mark's failed ventures. The more Rachel read, the more uneasy she felt. It wasn't just about the money. Philip was after something more. Her heart raced as a horrifying thought crossed her mind. What if Philip's interest in her cafe wasn't just about investment? What if he saw it as leverage against Mark? Rachel sat back, her hands trembling. She couldn't believe she hadn't seen it sooner. Philip wasn't here to help her. He was here to use her. The next morning, Rachel made the decision to confront Philip. She couldn't let this man, no matter how charming or professional he seemed, manipulate her life for his own gain. She arranged to meet him at the cafe before it opened, her nerves steeling as she prepared herself for the confrontation. When Philip arrived, he was all smiles, but Rachel could see through the facade now. She gestured for him to sit, her face expressionless as she stared across the table at him. "I know about you and Mark," Rachel said bluntly, cutting through the pleasantries. "I know you were his business partner, and I know you've been buying up properties connected to his failed ventures." Philip's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, his tone smooth and measured. "Rachel, I understand why this might concern you, but I assure you, my interest in your cafe is purely business. I see potential here, and I wanted to help you realize that." Rachel shook her head. "I don't believe you. I think you're here because you want something from Mark, and you're using me to get it." Philip's expression darkened slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Mark owes me a lot of money, Rachel. He disappeared and left me and several others, holding the bag. I'll admit, when I heard about your cafe, I saw an opportunity. But it's not what you think. I'm not here to manipulate you. I'm here to make things right." "Make things right?" Rachel scoffed. "You don't care about me or this cafe. You're just using me as a pawn in your game." Philip leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Rachel, if you let me invest, I can help you succeed. We can both benefit from this. You need the money, and I need to recoup what I lost." Rachel's stomach churned with anger. "I don't want your money, Philip, and I don't want to be part of whatever game you're playing." For a moment, Philip said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, smoothing his suit jacket with a practiced motion. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Rachel, but let me give you a piece of advice. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment. This is business, not personal." With that, he turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Rachel standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. A twist in trust. Rachel took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She had made her decision. She wouldn't let Philip or anyone else control her future. This cafe was her second chance, and she would protect it fiercely. But as the days passed, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Jonathan. She missed him, the way he had believed in her, the way he had supported her through the toughest times. She knew he had made a mistake by not telling her about Philip sooner, but deep down, she also knew that Jonathan's heart was in the right place. One evening, after a particularly long day at the cafe, Rachel found herself dialing Jonathan's number. Her heart raced as the phone rang, but when he answered, his voice was warm and familiar, and the tension in Rachel's chest eased. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Rachel said softly, her eyes focused on the window in front of her. "And I realized that I was angry, not just because you didn't tell me about Philip, but because I was scared." "Scared of what?" Jonathan's voice was gentle, and Rachel could picture him sitting in his apartment, listening intently. "Scared of trusting someone again," Rachel admitted. "After everything that happened with Mark, I wasn't sure I could trust anyone. But you've been there for me, and I pushed you away because I was afraid of getting hurt again." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Jonathan spoke. "Rachel, I never wanted to hurt you. I kept the truth from you because I thought it would complicate things, but I realize now that I should have been honest from the start. Rachel nodded, even though he couldn't see her. I know, and I want to try again if you do. Jonathan's voice softened. I want nothing more than to be a part of your life, Rachel. I believe in you, in the cafe, in everything you've built. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, but they were tears of relief, of hope. Thank you, Jonathan. From that moment on, things began to shift. Rachel and Jonathan rebuilt their relationship slowly, carefully, but with a newfound honesty that strengthened their bond. Jonathan helped her navigate the business side of the cafe, and together, they began planning ways to grow the business. This time, without Philip's involvement. The final revelation. Months passed, and second chances flourished. The cafe became a local favorite, and Rachel's hard work paid off in ways she had never imagined. She expanded the menu, hired more staff, and even began hosting events and community gatherings in the space. The cafe had become more than just a business. It had become a place of connection, of healing, not just for Rachel, but for everyone who walked through its doors. But one day, a letter arrived that would change everything. It was from a lawyer representing Philip's estate. Rachel opened it with trembling hands, her heart racing as she scanned the contents. Philip had passed away unexpectedly, and in his will, he had left something for Rachel, a trust fund, with the express instructions that it be used to expand her cafe. Rachel stared at the letter in disbelief. Why would Philip leave her money? After everything that had happened, after their confrontation, why would he still want to help her? The answer came in the final lines of the letter. Rachel, I know I made mistakes, and I know I hurt you, but I saw something in you that I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. You reminded me of what it means to build something out of nothing. This trust is my way of making things right. Use it wisely, and may you find the success and happiness you deserve. Sincerely, Philip. Tears filled Rachel's eyes as she folded the letter. In the end, Philip had wanted to make amends. It wasn't about the money or the business. It was about doing something good, something meaningful. Rachel stood in her cafe, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She had come full circle. Her cafe, her second chance, had not only given her a new life, but it had also given her a family, a future, and a sense of belonging she had never thought possible. And as Jonathan walked in, wrapping his arms around her, Rachel smiled, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them together. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.